Eskom has downgraded load shedding to stage 3 until further notice. That's following improvements in generation capacity over the past day. At the same time, the Department of Environmental Affairs has also granted a temporary exemption for the Kusile plant to release more emissions than legally allowed currently. That's in order to bypass an environmental filter to rebuild a damaged unit. The bypass could get over 2,000 megawatts of power back onto the grid 12 months earlier than expected. Eskom hopes to complete repairs by November this year. More about this with the South African Energy Forum's director, Hlathi Madela. Mr. Madela, very good evening to you. Grateful for your time. So 2,000 or so megawatts of power could come online as a result of this exemption. How much further will that take us in terms of reducing the intensity of load shedding, do you think?
Good evening to you and good evening to the newsroom listeners. It's really time for celebration, and I think South Africans must smile. We are all smiles because finally the chairperson of Eskom is going to receive the Minister of Electricity very well. That a solution that has always been there is now being executed. That we need to relax these environmental regulations. And we are going to do away with at least an equivalent of stage 2 of load shedding. We currently at stage 3, we may even go to stage 1. This is celebratory time really for us in the industry that finally we have someone who's able to get up his chair and go to the Department of Forest and Fisheries and Environmental Affairs and say, these things are done all around the world. Please let us do it so that we can bring back some of these units back. So very, very, very good. I'm very happy. And congratulations to Mpho Makwana, the chairperson, and the men and women at Eskom. It's celebration times for us. Thank you.
What about the potential environmental risk to the communities surrounding Kusile, the power plant, as well as workers who will be working there? Because among the conditions is that Eskom must further ensure that there are measures in place to protect them.
Look, I'm not an environmental denialist. All of these things are overplayed. There's a stack that sends this particulate matter up to the atmosphere, and it gets dispersed so that it doesn't fall in one place, and that's the whole idea of a stack. These things are overplayed and they are overhyped. There's a lot of power stations that are not fitted with the very same system that people are calling for. If I can give you an example, Medupi, which is doing very, very well in Limpopo, doesn't have the flue gas desulfurization system. It doesn't have the system that people are moaning about in Kusile. So we will get it right in 2024, but these things are overplayed as if someone is going to die tomorrow. There is no such, people are still going to live and they will continue to live. It is something that we have to celebrate because that was put there for the reason.
With respect, sir, pardon me if I can come in there, it's one thing to say the environmental risks are overplayed, but in terms of the sort of damage, for example, that comes from power stations that work in this traditional way, it's precisely problematic because when the air, for example, is polluted, you don't see the health impacts immediately, you see them later. And that is why there's been often concern about just how much of these toxins were emitting. So even if you're not going to die tomorrow, it's the responsible thing to do is to make sure that there isn't further damage so that in 5 to 10 years there aren't health issues, right?
No, Eskom is still going to build a flue gas desulfurization system by 2024. This is just for them to fast track the return of these 2,100 megawatts units up until November this year. It's just a minute amount of what they call acid rain. It doesn't kill anybody. And if you do it for the next 12 months or so, it's not going to have if you do it over years, of course it will cause a problem. So this is the type of leadership that we want, that these units were broken down. They could be brought back by just doing a mathematical calculation that says it's not going to cripple the environment in less than 12 months that you just buy time to arrest the load shedding. So it's one of those things that if it happens over a long period of time, it starts making an impact. It's almost like you, my friend, putting about 5 spoons of sugar in your coffee. You're not going to feel uncomfortable for a while, but if you continue doing that over a long period, you're going to suffer. So it's one of those things, really.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, just for people who are interested in what sulfur dioxide can do, prolonged exposure can, for example, cause respiratory diseases or make those diseases worse, for example, if you're already a sufferer. But let me come back to what Eskom needs to do then in this period that we're going to get these 2,000 extra megawatts of power from Kusile. What work does the utility also need to be doing sort of side by side to make sure that at the end of that 12-month period, the grid has been restored to a level where there isn't an immediate escalation in the intensity of power cuts just because this exemption has come to an end?
Well, they need to look for power stations that have been closed down, like Komati, which was one of the reasons why we got into the stage 6 load shedding, and try trading off those emissions against the other power stations of Eskom that needs to be returned to service. So what I'm trying to say to the listeners, as you want to bring one of the units that could potentially be a threat to the environment, you must also take into account the units that you have shut down. But they also need to now bring the right teams for operations and maintenance to fix the units that have been continuously giving us problems. And they also need to bring the units that we know they were deliberately shut down. The minute they started giving problems, they were never brought back to service. Units like in Grootfontein, units like in Tutuga, where it's a 6-unit station, only one has been operating. They need to look for all those units that have been completely neglected, and I can guarantee you if they do that, come December, load shedding will be a history in this country because the units are there. They just needed someone who prioritized them.
Mr. Hlathi Madela, good to speak to you, sir. Thank you for your time as always.